Okay, so this next part we're going to get into the not so fun part of doing some Flowgraph stuff. Well, I mean, it can be fun. I guess it depends on how far you're getting into it and if it really makes you happy. So Flowgraph is kind of like another step in visual scripting as well. It's very much like a flow chart you would use for explaining logical problems and stuff like that. You may be used to those in some of your schoolwork or something like that. So also a CVAR, we've seen me mention it a few times and stuff like that. Console is something that kind of runs in the background at all times for the game, and this is like showing you information about what's going on and stuff like that. A CVAR means a console variable, and a variable simply means a number. So a CVAR means it's a number you're defining for some sort of property in the console. Now the console is not read-only, it's not just spitting out information at you. You can send it commands and tell it what to do on the fly as well. Keep in mind a lot of CVARs are cheat protected, so they may not work when you're playing online. So for example, in the top right hand corner, as I discussed in the beginning of this tutorial video, r_display info equals 1 will show that information. So if I typed r_display info and press tab, well, it disappeared there because I typed it all out. If you don't type it all out, you can tab to it and it'll show it. But if I type a 0 after that, it'll make that thing in the top right hand corner disappear. And I can press up and you'll see on your mouse it comes back and you can select it again. Click it and it'll fill out the field, backspace, press 1, it'll come back. You'll use this a lot, but not necessarily in this one instance, just a useful tip for you. Okay, so whenever you want to do some Flowgraph, first you need to create an entity that will allow you to do a bunch of Flowgraph stuff. So for this I usually use main because these are my primary Flowgraph stuff, and main is kind of the default layer that's automatically created every time you create a new map. So what I usually do to make sure that I place an entity that I know will stand out, and I'll always know that it's an entity I never want to mess with after I create it once, is I'll place a comment entity down. So if I do entity in the objects roll up bar and then type in comment, you'll see the entity over here, drag it in, Control Shift click it. Make sure you place it in some place that you'll be able to easily see it. And you can see it's this little chat bubble with the exclamation or the I in there. That's an exclamation point. And there's a little exclamation point icons over it though. Yeah. Anyways, what I usually do is do something ridiculous, like in the comment. See, and normally it's comment 1, and I'll name this something like main Flowgraph, and I'll actually rename it. And then I'll do like the in the text itself, I'll type something like do not delete. It's very important. Once you create this thing, do not ever delete it, because what's going to happen is all this Flowgraph you're going to now create is going to be linked to this entity, and as soon as you delete it, all that work is gone. So please make sure you're not deleting this object after you create it, and you want to make it stand out as much as possible because of that. You can even freeze it if you want, but the problem is, here's the tricky thing. If you want to edit the Flowgraph that this entity is holding, the layer this entity on must be selectable. So that means you can't freeze it, you can't hide the entity or anything like that. So keep that in mind. If you open up Flowgraph and you're trying to edit some CVARs or something like that, and you can't select anything, that's because you don't have the layer selectable that this entity's on. Okay, once I got the entity placed and named, make sure it stands out, I'm going to go into the entity properties and scroll down, and you'll see this Flowgraph area. Click create. What I usually do is make a name, main Flowgraph again. Okay, then this should pop up the Flowgraph window. Your Flowgraph window sometimes might be up in the top left hand corner all scrunched up, so if every time you try to bring up Flowgraph and nothing's happening, just take a look in your top left corner. It might be all scrunched up over there. So real quickly, Flowgraph. It's a big beast, and we're not going to go into all the little tiny things you can do with Flowgraph. But imagine Flowgraph it's kind of like your programming, but with very a lot more constrained elements rather than just pure chaos all over the place. And that doesn't mean you can make some things that really break stuff, and that doesn't mean you're not going to find some things that just don't work with Nexus. There's a lot of little nodes here that we never tested, we never used with Nexus, so don't expect them to work necessarily. Please just try and play around. Make sure you take a look at our Wikipedia for more information, and also look in the CryEngine 3 free SDK Wikipedia for more information too. Whenever you're here, the first thing to remember is in the Flowgraph section in the bottom left, you want to always make sure you're in the right area. So in here you can see a bunch of different things: AI actions, UI actions, material, FG, all this stuff. All you ever need to worry about is what's under this entities folder, and then make sure you're using your entity itself, and that's it. Don't mess around with any of that other stuff. It's going to lead you nowhere. So first things first, up here on the top you have play, stop. I don't even use that. This is a debug thing, so if something's breaking in your chain, it'll tell you that something's broken. It's pretty handy if you have a pretty complex scripting system going on. We won't show you anything like that right now. Let's just very quickly get what's necessary to create your first map and get it out the door. So I have like a Microsoft Word version of the exact same Wikipedia information we have on our Nexuiz Wiki. So make sure you go there if this isn't making sense or you need exact text. Just look up the required CVARS section and you'll find all these CVARs. So these are console variables that we want to define at the beginning of the map every time you come into your map. The reason why these exist is because sometimes you'll have levels that don't have terrain, they don't have ocean, they have a different time of day, they have all these different types of settings that may be different on other maps. So you need to make sure that every time the map's loaded, these settings are reset. So these are kind of like universal CVARs that we use across every single map. So for example, in your map, if you're turning off the ocean, or for in better case, like let's say I'm in tension and the ocean and terrain's there, right? You can see it in the distance, but in your map you don't want ocean or terrain, and I come from tension and I load into your map, there's going to be ocean and terrain because the CVARs were turned on in tension, but they weren't turned off in your map. So you want to make sure those are getting turned off. So first thing you want to do is create a start node, and you can do that by right-clicking this gray field and just going down to add start node. And what a start node does is anytime the game starts, and that's like loading the level and starting, or if you press Control G in the editor and start, this CVAR is going to be set off. And now most events also from the start node, if you press the AI physics button down here on the bottom center of the screen, it'll fire off those too. So keep that in mind. But also keep in mind all of them may not fire off. Okay, so to do the next one, we need to add a console variable node, and that lets us define a CVAR. There's different ways you can do this. You can do add node and browse through all these things. I prefer to over here on the left to see this component section. Again, filtering is really easy for this stuff. So just go in the search keyword field and type in console. Now you'll see that it doesn't expand these folders, but you can click them and then you can see two different things. And both of these nodes have the word console in them. And we want to use this one that's in system. It's a console variable. Simply drag it into the field, and there you go. You got it. So what you want to do is there's two ways you can edit this. You can either edit this by clicking the actual, kind of like double clicking. I mean, this is all weird. I recommend doing it over here on the right. See this up here in the input section? What you see in this actual little node where it says CVAR equal, value equal, all those inputs you can actually edit if there's any sort of field. So the CVAR, let's say for the first one we want to do is E_water ocean. And this CVAR will literally hide or unhide the ocean upon level load. Let's say you want the ocean in this map, so we're going to make that 1. Okay, that's easy enough. Now let's just simply copy and paste this, and Control C and Control V. Then name the next one E_water ocean bottom. Now water ocean bottom is there's a certain material playing underneath the ocean at all times, and it's doing some interesting like little effects causing caustics and stuff like that. If you're not anywhere close to the ocean and you're not seeing the terrain underneath or anything like that, it's unnecessary overhead and you should get rid of it. In this case, we're going to turn it off. Again, just copy that and paste it. And you notice what I'm doing is every time I create them, I'm moving them and I'm stacking them. As you move them around, they're on some sort of like grid. That's why it's kind of like popping around. It's very important to keep this stuff organized, or you're going to create a big mess for yourself later, as you'll see. So let's go ahead and name this one E_terrain. I'm not going to show off terrain in this map. I'm just going to act like this. These are just floating in the middle of the ocean, in the middle of nowhere. You can't see the ground. So let's turn that off. Okay. Let's set this next CVAR to E_vox TER. Now what this is voxel terrain, and I know that voxel and voxel rendering is something really cool in CryEngine 3. We haven't had much luck with it. Something may have broken at some point in our editor or something like that. Don't try to use it. It creates problems. I have not even been able to see it working. I imagine somebody might find some way and get it working. Props to you. I recommend keeping this turned off because I've had issues with terrain rendering sometimes and water rendering sometimes with this CVARS turned on. So I always recommend it staying 0. But if you ever want to play with it, we're leaving it open for you. Okay, so the next CVAR, you want to name this one SV_time of day enable. Set this to 1. This will enable time of day adjustments. Copy and paste. Do this one SV_time of day length. And this will make sure your daytime's not playing. In the beginning of Nexuiz, we wanted that awesome CryEngine 3, like daylight cycling and stuff. It was really cool to be able to see the sunlight move and the shadows move. The problem comes with the server and clients talking to each other. If the server's trying to always constantly be authoritative, and what's happening is even though the server's seeing like this dynamic moving sky and it looks really cool, all the clients are seeing like a bunch of jittering in the shadows because the server's telling the clients to do one thing with the clients saying to do another, and it's just causing a big problem. So we always say turn that off. If you can get it working though, please tell us. We'd love it. We just haven't had time to look into it. Okay, so these ones are just kind of like what we call the unified CVARs. We define them on every map. So to get them all working, what you want to do is drag a line from output in the start node and bring it into this set on each one of these. So drag from out into set. Okay, the next CVAR you're going to want to set is what's called G_Z dist kill limit. And what this does is it ensures that there's always a point where the player is going to die from falling off the map. Like we said in the beginning, there's no swimming or anything like that, so you want to kill them eventually, and this is where you define that. By default, it's set at 0. And here's the big thing. You need to make sure you set this. This is the most important CVAR out of all of them. You have to set this, or if you're coming from a really, really high up in the air map like Strength, where the Z dist kills really high up there, and your map's really low to the ground, every time you spawn as a player, if you come from Strength and then go into your map and you don't have this defined, anytime you spawn as a player you're going to die over and over every single time, and that's because you're spawning underneath this kill Z distance. I always like to keep these separate just because it helps me spot them out better. Okay, the CVAR for this is G_Z DIST-KILLLIMIT. And here's the fun part. So for the value, you actually want this to be a Z value. And like we said in the beginning, the cam POS up in the top left hand corner of the R display info will tell you your Z distance. So let's get that to a reasonable level. And you can see here it's saying I'm at 47.33 Z height. So I'm just going to go ahead and use 47. There you go, set that, and you got all your required CVARs for a map. Now this doesn't mean you have all the dynamic mutators. We're not going to cover that in this tutorial, but please make sure you read the Wikipedia and learn how to set up dynamic mutators. Before we wrap up these required CVARs, let's go ahead and make sure whenever you open up this Flowgraph you can easily spot them. What you want to do is add this comment box. You right click, add comment, and add comment box. Whenever you have a bunch of nodes selected, and you can select a bunch of nodes just by dragging a box, add comment, comment box, type in whatever, required CVARs.